Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of the podcast, Not Quite Strangers. My name is Valerie Host. I'm Valerie Host. I'm Valerie Hope. I'm your host. And this podcast is all about inspiring curiosity, shifting perspectives, and establishing connections with other human beings. Today is an extra special episode because it happens to be the final episode. And there's so many things behind this idea, the notion of final episode, that I was like, there's no way that I can unpack this on my own. There's just too many features. And one of the principal features of this podcast actually is my friend, Felipe Ferreira, who my partner in crime helped me establish and get it off the ground and supported me in the podcast for an entire year. And so he is actually going to be interviewing me for the podcast, or at least hosting the conversation. And Felipe, what's funny is, that you've been the most invited guest on this podcast. Are you familiar with that?
I wouldn't be able to really point that out, but now that you're saying, it kind of makes sense.
You've been on it the most. You've been on it. This is your third time. No one comes
It's a
back
charm.
3 times. Third time is the charm. Absolutely. So I'm so first of all, so grateful. And I just want to let people know how much I love you and I care about you and I trust you. And so to hand the hosting duty to someone that I know will honors this entire the purpose of this podcast as much as I do. And you've been there from day one, literally day one, sitting in. So I thought this would be such a wonderful way to close this wonderful chapter. So welcome to the show, Felipe.
Oh, wow, what a responsibility. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Felipe, not Felipe host or hope, but yes, I'm gonna be the host, or as Valerie said, I'll kind of lead the conversation today. Such a pleasure, really. What a big responsibility. I'm super, super honored and super happy to be here honoring Not Quite Strangers. What a ride. What a ride. Thank you for this opportunity. And yeah, so well, I'm very privileged to have amazing conversations on a regular basis with you. This will be a recorded one.
Yeah.
But definitely and although I have prepared some questions because I'm sure the audience is also curious about hearing some of the things that we have planned, or some maybe behind the scenes information. I wanted to feel, yeah, as natural and as enjoyable as all of our conversations, and
Thanks.
hopefully, yeah, people will feel it as well.
Cool.
But wow, let me just then start asking you. Not Quite Strangers is all about connecting people.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious to know, when did you realize you, Miss Valerie Hope, you were a connector?
Man, when did I realize this? I don't know if there was a time when I realized it, right? Like I'm a connector, but I think there was a time when I started getting really interested in it, like connecting with people. So, and I've shared this before on the podcast, and you, of course, Felipe, know that I'm an immigrant to the US, right? And so my family and I came to the United States when I was 9 years old. We immigrated from the Republic of Panama. And my dad joined the military. And so we moved around quite a bit during our younger years. So I think a couple things. One is because I love people, I'm an extrovert, I enjoy the company of people. When you move often, especially at that age, come to a new school, we come in the middle of the school year. So it's not like, you don't know anybody, you haven't had a chance to really get connected to the community. So part of it was like a forced function that I had to anyway, to get involved in some of the things that we were doing in the communities where we lived. My mom forced it also by making sure that we were volunteering or get involved in the scouts or find a church or volunteer for other stuff. So those are times when I knew that the connection was essential, especially you're only in, if I'm only in a place for a year, 2 years, 4 years, to make the most out of it, I knew I needed people. So I think that was where I was conscious of the need for it. And then throughout my life, there have been different moments, especially around travel, where I've always been compelled to like connect with people from different cultures or backgrounds and ask questions and get to know them. And so these are the clues that I've gotten, but I think that was the most impactful one.
Well, it doesn't come supernaturally for everybody, right? Like maybe it was for you. Any techniques that you could share with the audience? So if there's anything we can do to better connect with others, some secrets, any tips?
Secrets. Okay. It's funny. I remember having a similar conversation with a young student. I was a mentor in a program for college readiness called Eagle Scholars here in Texas. And these were 7th to 12th graders who were all learning all sorts of skills to help them be successful in school, but also prepare them for college. And this one student, I think she must have been in the 8th grade and was going into the high school, right, for the first time, making the transition from middle school to high school here. We started, and she's pretty introverted, so we started talking a bit about what she was nervous about moving into high school, and she's like, I'm not really good, Miss Valerie, like meeting people, but once I know people, I'm okay. But I think in the beginning it's gonna be very hard. And I remember telling her, I said, you know what the trick is, and this is gonna be the easiest thing you'll ever have to do. And I was saying, try not to be interesting, be interested. People love opportunities to share. People do love opportunities to connect, but it's not like a fight for attention, right? I think just willingly, in her case, I said, just be interested. Find someone that's wearing something interesting or says something interesting in class or something that makes you think or something that makes you laugh. Or it doesn't matter. And just walk up to them and let them know, hey, that was really funny what you said. Or I love that top. Where'd you get it? Or, where'd you get this book? I've been trying to find it in the library. Whatever. Be interested in people, and all sorts of connections could happen from there. That's like my number one secret. And then the number two secret, because once you get that connection, that attention, I remember getting a compliment years ago from someone in a workshop I was doing, an older gentleman, and he just came up to me and we were talking about, I'm not really sure, maybe it's something around the workshop during a break. And after some time, he stopped and he's like, I don't talk like this normally. I'm like, I don't, what does that mean? You don't talk like this normally. He's like, I don't usually share so much of myself with people. And I was like, oh, okay. So why are you sharing so much? He's like, it's because of the way you listen. There's something about how you listen that has me share. And I had never heard it put quite that way, but the realization I had and that he was pointing out was that there's a way of listening that inspires people to share. I mean, just think about it. Don't believe me, but think about the people that you tell your secret to. What is that quality? They don't say, you can tell me all your secrets, trust me. That's not usually the way it comes across, right? Sometimes it's just a matter of they don't have any kind of judgmental expression on their face. They seem to lean in when you're talking. They pause what they're doing. There's something about the way their attention focuses on you. So those are the nonverbals, but I think the verbal part is, these noises that we sometimes make when we're listening to people. I tend to go, often, right? Like, interesting, or I'll say interesting or nod my head or something. But there's one thing about being interested in a person, and then the other part is being able to listen to the person and the way in which we listen.
Okay, well, you've been so interested in people and you have listened so well that this is actually your second podcast, right? So at first you had Time to Come Alive, and at some point you felt the need to release a new podcast, which is Not Quite Strangers. I kind of know where these desire came from, but can you share with the audience a little bit about your process and how Not Quite Strangers actually came alive? No pun intended.
It was a stormy evening,
Oh my gosh.
October 20. I don't know. I don't know if it was stormy or not, but it was sometime in the fall of 2020.
Mhm.
And just for some historical context, the George Floyd had just been murdered. That is sparked not only outrage globally, but also I think internally for a lot of people. Right, we were in the midst of a pandemic. People were there's a lot of uncertainty in the air, and the social justice initiative and intention started to really come to a high pitch. And I'd been reached, people had reached out to me in a few different organizations asking if I did any type of work with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And my instinct was to say, nah, it's not my specialty. It's not my specialty, but maybe I can recommend some people to you. Well, it so happened that I went to a social justice event that was sponsored by Berkeley, the University of California at Berkeley. And I can't remember the content of that particular event other than they put us in a breakout room very early on in the session and asked us to talk about community and what our community looked like. And so we go into this breakout. I was in the breakout room with a couple of colleagues of mine from Berkeley, because I've done some work with them. And when we were talking about community, I just shared about how diverse my community is, right? So like you, Felipe, are from Brazil, living in Germany. I have my best friend is from Mexico. The guy I'm seeing is from Germany, from Egypt, sorry. So like there's all these different, very organic relationships I have with so many different cultures. And the two that were with me both said, I wish our kids could grow up, I wish my kids could grow up having that type of connection with so many different cultures. And my thought was like, well, if you live in a metropolitan city, which they did, that should be fairly easy. That's accessible, right? But then there was some concern about how authentic it would come across. And anyways, we didn't get a chance to go deep into it, but just that moment, that conversation had me spinning like, what is it that makes it so easy and organic for me, and for others it's very laborious or confronting, or they feel some sort of insecurity about it. And that was like the seed that was planted. And it took me several months and conversations, and I'm sure you and I talked tons about it before anything ever happened. But it was a few months later that I was like, okay, I think a podcast. I can't talk about what I do to build these types of communities. Let me just show people. So it became like a show and tell, so to speak. And just sharing with people, here's the example of what it's like to connect with people in authentic and meaningful ways. So that's the brainchild. And do you remember when we talked about that initially? What do you remember about that first moment?
Yeah, well, I was still in Brazil, and I remember you kind of sharing this urge or this need to share a different message with the world, right? So I remember you, yeah, now that you're saying, I'm kind of recollecting, you did mention that specific conversation that you had. And then you said, well, I think there's an opportunity for me to do something about it, right? And then, yes, we had a few sessions, and I know that you also reached out to people of your trust, of your circle of trust as well, to get different perspectives, and up to the moment where you had something a bit more concrete. And then we started working on the idea, and maybe scheduling the first guests or the first episodes, like the pilots. So yeah, that's what I remember. But it was really like, um it took some time, and I think that's also beautiful, because like, and I've told you that before, seeing you create stuff really teaches me a lot. It's really, your process tends to be very organic, right? And that was no different with Not Quite Strangers, right?
So, okay, I know that you have other questions, but I have a couple right now. Um,
Hit
um,
me.
what?
Yeah.
So obviously, just we're friends, and so I'm sharing things with you. This was in the middle of a pandemic, and we were meeting just to connect on a regular basis. What was it that drew you in? Like, why did you say, "Yeah, let me help," or "I want to support this"? Like, what was it about this podcast that interested you?
Mhm. Um, if we think this can be seen as a very simple idea, but first of all, I don't believe it was being done or was being done with the intention that you had. Again, so all of this background that you shared, we were in this pandemic world. Um, there was this need for connection. And I just love hearing stories. And I think, my gosh, like the premise is really simple. And don't get me, please don't get me wrong when I say it, but um, it's so simple that it was not there yet. And I just thought it was an amazing opportunity to be part of something that
Mm,
could, again, spark a whole bunch of different conversations and and why not? I just wanted to be part of it and yeah, well, I say yes to a lot of your crazy ideas, and that
Wait, you're
was just
saying this was crazy?
well,
It
it
kind of
was
was a little
beautifully
bit. It was
beautifully crazy.
that's a little crazy.
And yeah, I just really wanted to be part of that because I also think, and now, well, okay, back to my questions now, because
Yeah.
I do think that these conversations actually resonated differently because of the moment that this podcast was
Mm,
launched, right? So this
mm,
was launched in February 2021.
yeah.
So now I actually, but this is just my opinion. I would like to hear from you. Do you also think, or how did these messages resonate on that context, on that world?
Wow. Um, how did it resonate? I think you and I talked about this a little bit. But I think, when everybody was so split apart, right? We were asked to shelter in place. Everyone was staying home. You could barely go out. And it's, what's interesting, Felipe, I'll think about those years of the pandemic when we were all, cloistered basically, right? We were all supposed to be staying in place. And I I don't feel like I don't think I lost any traction or momentum in connecting with people. If nothing else, I think it intensified. Not only did it do it because of the podcast, and I was, in the initial phases thinking about who I was going to bring together and how I was going to do it, but also with my family. We started a family podcast too, right? Bringing people together, getting to know one another. And so I think for me, the like you said, the intention was to put out a message where, hey, it's easy to connect with people if you really just give people an opportunity, be interested, listen well, etc. But more than anything, I think the the friendships and the forced intentional connection where people were being told to stay apart, right? And so yeah, you can stay apart and maybe just have the same conversation with your neighbor. Maybe you have your, what did we call those groups where you
The
connected with other,
gatherings,
sorry?
gatherings,
Not
or
the gatherings, but you know how they were telling you, okay, you have your bubble, like create your
oh
bubbles.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
During the
yeah,
pandemic is like, don't, unless you're all deciding that you're
yeah.
only going to see each other and you're only going to be hanging out with each other and you're not going to be exposed to da 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 da, right? So your bubble. And I'm like, that's so limiting. Like, why would I only want to have, yeah, I get it in person, but man, this virtual world opens up so many possibilities. People from different countries and cultures and backgrounds and time zones and you name it. So I think what resonated was that there's still an opportunity to connect in meaningful ways when people were so afraid of being with other people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Good. Oh, that's nice.
No
Well,
fear on Zoom.
yeah.
Zoom is a fearless space.
We all got pros, definitely, right? With all of
Right,
the huge features and everything, but yeah,
right.
yeah, it is. Well, there is a higher purpose connected to it, right?
Hmm.
I mean, you found one, and I
Yeah,
think that's great. Yeah,
100%.
yeah. And well, Not Quite Strangers, I usually say that it's more than a podcast because along with the episodes, you came up with different things, right? So every 2 weeks, you would have a connection challenge.
Mm,
And during the first year, we also organized some gatherings every end of the
mm,
quarter just to bring the guests and the listeners all together for some activities, some meaningful conversations as well.
mm.
Um, why did you choose to have these gatherings and the connection challenges to come along and to support Not Quite Strangers?
Mm. I'm sure at some point, and you'll have to remind me of some of these details because I'm
Mm,
not the best at remembering all the specific details around this. But I think at some point in time, it was like, hey, these conversations are great. I'm sure there are people who listen and feel like they get something out of it, but it's not supposed to just be like a for entertainment. I mean, it could, right? You could just
mhm,
watch it and be like, "Oh, that was interesting. Oh yeah, Felipe, that guy from Brazil. Oh yeah, I was interested," right? But I think there was something in me. There's always a teacher in me that kind of goes, where can I help people learn something? Right. And so I think the connection challenges were really born out of, okay, now you've watched this conversation. So what? What are you going to do with what you watch and what you learned or what you heard? So you can go into your own community and find someone that has a similar, maybe the topic sparked some questions for you. So you connect with your family about it, or perhaps you share something of yourself that you're discovering with somebody that you care about or someone that you don't know very well. So I think it was a way to also like a forcing function, right? To now give people some homework. Basically, it was, the connection challenges were homework. And that was a part you played a really big part in it because you were coming up with them for that first, but I guess the whole first year, it was you coming up, we collaborated, we talked about the topic, but essentially, and you created this master spreadsheet, like here are the episodes, and here's a connection challenge that will be best matched with that particular episode topic and whatever. So, what was that like for you?
it was rough.
Wow.
Yeah, but because we really wanted to do something meaningful, right? And as you said, the reach, the content from the out of these conversations were so rich, right? That we just couldn't ask anything for people. We really wanted to make sure those were an extension of these conversations, and again, that these challenges would really spark something different
Mhm.
in people. So and you got to put some effort, right? When you are creating something like that. So yeah, a lot of brain power, but definitely worth it.
I do remember there's some times you're like, Valerie, what do you want me to write? Like, I don't
I
know.
don't know.
What
I don't know what to
what is
do.
this about? But you were so willing. So I appreciate that. I can imagine being put in this on the spot that way. And you're like, this is gonna be sent out to the world, Felipe. What should we say?
Big thing. Yeah.
No, but good. And then you mentioned the gatherings, and so
Mm,
obviously I hosted the show and had the conversations, facilitated those conversations, and then you were supporting me and putting together those connection challenges. But then there was a point in time, and I think you and I talked about it, and I want to hear your version of the story. But I remember at one point going, wow, there's so many cool people. I know so many wonderful people, and I have these great conversations, but there's other cool people that they haven't met yet. They should all meet. And what about the audience who's been listening? They should also see all these other people and like connect with them. So this idea of doing a gathering came about where we only invited the guests who had been on the podcast up to that point in that quarter. And then what else? And then I guess I think it was like, did we handpick or did we? I think only people who were subscribed, only subscribers
yeah.
got to come. So people who were subscribed to my mailing list or whatever were the ones that received the invitation directly. And then we might have hand selected a few people who were not, but ultimately, and then you were leading the charge on that too. You used all your facilitation skills. We had a playlist, you created slides and activities for people, and oh man, it was cool, it was fun, it was a lot of work, I'm not gonna lie. But what's your recollection of that?
Yeah, well, two things come to my mind. So the first one, and now that you're saying that, it's just so interesting to go back a few years. And I don't know if you guys listening or watching this today know about this, but Valerie has the coolest gang. She connects you to everyone in different parts of the world, and she just happens to have not happens to have she has put effort in building this amazing gang, this amazing community. So now that you're saying that, I think it was just an extension again of who you are, um of the great people that you bring together. And I think it was like yeah, a bigger version of Valerie's gang, right? And yeah, and everybody deserved
Valerie's
to,
gang.
to get to know these people.
They
Yeah.
do. They're all cool
Right.
people, and some of them really connected so well. It was so fun.
I know. Well, I have a lot of people in my circle that were introduced by
That's
you. And I'm sure, again, all of these episodes generated a lot of conversations and a lot of different new connections as well.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, even I connected to some people. I started to follow on social media some of your guests because I also wanted to be inspired by them, or I wanted to hear more stories, you know. So yeah, I really think again these gatherings were just an extension of this community, this cool Valerie gang. And the second thing that comes to my mind was the first one. So we were organizing everything and we were putting together, and I remember like, I don't know, 3 minutes before we went live on Zoom, I totally freaked out. I was like, oh my gosh, Valerie, what if I say something stupid? What if? And then I remember you said, like, Felipe, we are here to have fun. In the end of the day, really, our intention is the best. And if people are here to join us, like they know who we are, they know the intention behind it, you know. And it was probably even deeper than that. But basically, the big idea was let's just enjoy it. You know, we know why we are here for, and let's just have some fun. And I think that was a very valuable lesson. It ended up turning super well.
Yeah.
It was great. We did have fun, and this is something that I carry ever since with me whenever I have like these big, you know, like live moments.
Mm.
Because yeah, those were actually my two biggest moments or memories when it comes to the gatherings.
Gathering. And I remember because you were at your parents' house in Brazil, and the acoustics or something were off. So you like had to like put like a mattress.
Yeah.
You had to
Can
rearrange your
someone
whole
get
room.
me headphones, please? Like people need to listen to me. It was a whole thing. It was a whole
Oh,
thing,
it was
but
a thing. It was, yeah, it was a lot. We did. I think, you know, I'm really proud of the intention. I'm proud of the people that we had. And by the way, in case you're wondering, none of that was recorded for general consumption. I don't think, did we record any of them?
um no, I don't think
No,
so.
'cause,
No,
yeah,
no,
we
no.
didn't
That
want
was
to
not the
inhibit.
intention. Yeah.
That's right. We didn't want to inhibit conversation or
Yeah.
sharing and that sort of thing. So, and we had all sorts of like breakout room activities where they had to meet with different people and had certain topics. And we did 4 of them over the course of that year. And they were all very different. We had different groups of people. They could always come back, right? If people had come to the first one, they could come back. But yeah, I'm so grateful that we tried it. And that was just a lot of work. So I think at some point we're like, let's just stop. We're good. It's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
Then you got your job in
Ex-
Germany. So
Exactly.
that we had to transition to so many other things then.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. But just coming back up a bit to these challenges, because while they are, yeah, they kept going on, maybe not the gatherings, but the challenges, of
Yeah.
course. Um, do you remember receiving any feedback or any comments? Because I do know that you posted them everywhere on the Not Quite Strangers Instagram profile, on your LinkedIn page, for example.
Mhm.
Any comments that were really like, oh wow, yes, I think yeah, we hit the spot with that one. I was able to touch someone.
Yeah. You know, I'm sure I have in the span of the past 2.5 years, but I can't remember right now. And to be honest, I think there are times when it was just get things out there. Let's just get it out there. What I didn't do with this podcast was promote it to the level I think it could have. My mom was like, you should engage with the audience, right? Like, go ahead and ask them questions. And I'm just like, I don't have time for that. Like, my engagement is just a post and there's a question and like, go do this in your life. And so that was my wish, right? That people would go out and do whatever it was in the theme of the challenge. And not to diminish at all, right? My want and need to connect with the audience. I just knew that, this is a passion project for me. And it was one that took a considerable amount of time and energy and some resources and that sort of thing. And I knew that it would have the intent. First of all, you said it earlier, right? This whole thing about being organic, I think for me is very spiritual. Really, that's what it means. When I say, or when you say organic, for me, I interpret that into spiritual. I think it was guided, absolutely guided by spirit to like, hey, this is what you put out there. Do not worry or concern yourself with how it's going to be interpreted or who's going to watch and what they're going to think or whatever. Just put it out there. One of those, if you build it, they will come. They will come from like the field of dreams. But I do think that in the back of my mind, I could get caught up in like, well, how many people watched it? And how many people, did anyone comment? Did anyone say, right? Which in some occasions people did, but really, I think at the forefront, it was more about just put it out there. The right people will see it when it's time to see it, or the right people will act on it when it's time to act. If nothing else, it will plant a seed that wasn't there before. And this will be a way for them to continue to be fed and nurtured in that way. So. Yeah,
that's interesting to hear. Yeah. One of the intentions, I'm not sure if that was one of the intentions. I think so, but I can say as a listener, these podcasts offered me a lot of companionship in many moments in my uncertain times during the pandemic, or even during my now regular Sunday morning walks. That's definitely a huge thing, and I will remember Not Quite Strangers as this source of, again, interesting people, of learning so many different things, and most of all, again, having companionship. This is feedback, natural feedback right there for you. What kind of what other feedbacks have you got throughout the past couple of years about Not Quite Strangers, if you don't mind sharing with us?
Sure, man. I remember actually recently getting an email from someone that said she'd watched an episode of some of my friends talking about their friendship, and this was actually it was my former pastor from church, and she sent me a text. That's what it was. She sent me a text and said how moved she was to see these three men talking about male friendships and the importance. It did just touch my heart. Oh my gosh, it was so great. And it was unsolicited, right? So I was thrilled, first of all, that she had watched it, but more than anything, that these men that, I care about so much, I was able to share the message with them. So I think I'm as excited or even more excited when my guests get some validation for the effort they put, the time that they took, right, to be on the podcast. I don't take that for granted. There have been amazing guests over the course of the last 70. This is episode 78, right? But the idea that someone would say yes to being on camera and sharing something. And by the way, nothing was scripted. Felipe, you know this, right?
You know that?
It's verified. There was
sure.
We're going to say this and I'm going to say that. And then you'll say this, with the exception of, hey, I'm going to introduce you. Then we're going to talk. And then I'm going to ask you some questions about the experience. Boom. That was it. Right. That people trusted me enough. And that was something I think came up often. So there's some feedback from the guests saying that there was trust. They felt absolutely cared for in those moments. And they were so grateful for having met the other person that they met, or having deepened the relationship they had with the person if they already knew them. And then from viewers and listeners, I did every once in a while would get something or a comment on social media or an email from somebody saying, oh, this episode's really great. I'm sharing this. Like there was an organization, someone that was in diversity, equity, and inclusion in their organization that said, oh my gosh, I want to share. I think it was the transgender episode. I want to share this with someone on my team, and maybe this is something that we could start thinking and talking about, or so those kind of things. I was like, yeah, cool, share it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you covered so many different topics. What was your source of inspiration for topics and for putting people together?
Source of inspiration for the topics and putting people together. I think first thing that comes to mind for the topics is, do I care enough about this topic to talk about it? Right. And I gotta say, and no shade, but my first episode was my brother and a fellow coach. And I put them together because they both have a passion for soccer. So if y'all check out episode 1, right? And it was also my start, right? I was just trying to feel this out, like, how is this going to go? How's this episode going to run? And but man, they got deep. They got deep into soccer and the history and like the players from what other countries. And I was doing all I could to stay engaged in the conversation without having anything to contribute, right? And it was challenging. It was challenging because I didn't want to just throw off. I love the connection that they were forming with one another, and I didn't want to just throw off by asking something so random. And so I made a choice to just really encourage the conversation as best I could without prompting too many questions. But then I got some feedback afterwards from my sister-in-law, actually, who watched her husband on that episode. And she said, one thing that would have been interesting to talk about was not only their love for the sport, but also both of them and their roles as coaches. My brother coaching soccer, and then this other gentleman, executive coach, and maybe how that sport has influenced their style and whatever. And I'm like, you're right, man, that's a missed opportunity, and it would have made much more, it would have been more relevant for me. Right. So I think that was a great lesson in what the best way to encourage conversation, or to at least guide conversation. So I've always been inspired for, like, okay, what's something that I would want to talk about? Either because I'm curious about it and I don't know enough. Like, for example, the transgender episode, we talked a lot about that. It's not something I've studied, but I'm like, hey, how does this work? What do you guys think? Or, when talking to kids, you and I were on an episode with the 7th and 8th grader, and talk to them about their perspective about life. And, so there are things that I don't necessarily know, but I'd love to hear and ask. Or there are things that I've been wanting to talk to somebody about. So that's like the inspiration for the topic. For the people, it's been interesting because I meet someone and I'm like, I want to talk to them more. Or, oh, that's a really cool subject to talk to them about. Who else would talk about this or would be open to talking about it? And then I bring them together. They don't necessarily have to have that something in common, but I usually look for openness, someone that's open and interested in others, and also someone who's willing to share openly, right? That they're able to give us more than just like the intellectual answers. Like, they would actually be, really authentic and genuine. And those are usually the signs that this would make a good podcast guest, and someone that I didn't have to like pull forcefully information, right? That I could ask a question or throw out a topic and they would just flow with it. Those were my usual thoughts when I brought somebody together.
Yeah. And well, at this point, probably everyone knows Valerie. She connects and she talks to everyone. And I remember being surprised in one of the episodes. I started listening to an episode, and she basically said that she got connected to one of the guests because that particular guest was her Lyft driver. And I said, this is so Valerie. Obviously, this is so Valerie. I could picture, as you were telling the story on how you you got connected to her, and and you were telling the story, and I was picturing it was 5 a.m. It was in Dallas. I could see the whole scene, and
So true.
obviously she was there, and yeah, it was a great episode talking about personal style and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
identity. So I said, well, definitely that's so
India,
valuable.
that was India and Nadia. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
hmm But again, well, and you kind of touched on that, missed opportunities. You covered so much. If we were to have a 9 episode,
79.
yeah, ninth episode, um, is there a particular topic that it would cover?
One that did not get covered that I hoped would be, but just be due to scheduling, that sort of thing just didn't happen. I had a couple of friends from my circle of friends here in Dallas that we call ourselves the IPC, International Party Crew. And the three gentlemen I was talking about earlier is Sammy, James, and Abhijit. That was the one that my pastor reached out and said, "Oh my gosh, it was such a lovely conversation." So when that conversation happened, it was so fun. I was like, you know what? We need to highlight some of the girls in this group, right? The ladies of this group. And so I had in mind a couple of my friends from the group that I thought would be really interesting to connect about and to talk about how to maintain relationships from a distance, because both of them have since moved from Dallas, and we've all still maintained a really close connection over the last decade or so that they've been away. And so I thought that would be an interesting conversation to have. So that was the one topic that was pending. And I had a couple of other opportunities too with other guests. But I think that that particular topic, because this idea of connecting with somebody in meaningful ways that does not live near you, like, by the way, if you don't know this, and we may have mentioned this in other in the podcast that you've been in the past, but Felipe, you and I have only seen each other in person twice in our lifetime. In the lifetime, as close as we share so much. We talk at least twice a month. We're on Zoom catching up and stuff, and we've only seen each other in person twice. And when was the last time we saw each other, Felipe?
Um, 2017 or 18.
Yeah. Crazy, right?
Long time
So
ago. Well, that you're saying that, it sounds so weird because I feel you're next door here.
right, right. And so I think the idea of having some conversation with someone, not just conversation, but establishing a friendship and a relationship that's long lasting and authentic and supportive, and there's companionship in our connection. I think that topic bears some more exploration, right, from a
Mm,
lot of different perspectives, because it does require some sacrifice. In some cases it requires planning, it requires intention, it requires a willingness. There's so many things, but that, yeah, I think there's something special about just knowing that I have friends all over the world that even if I haven't seen them in person in a long time, that I can still, and we click, and we click. There's
mm,
somebody out there. For those of you watching and listening, there is somebody out there who you haven't met yet, who is absolutely going to be like your best friend. It's a BFF for sure. You just haven't met them yet, or you haven't been willing enough to connect in regular basis to develop the relationship. But I'm so grateful that I have that instinct to do so, because we would not have had this relationship and friendship for so many years if we'd just been like, okay, because we met professionally, right? We met through Hyatt
yeah.
and worked together in a couple of things. I visited Brazil once, we met in person, and then we just started to talk and here and there. And all of a sudden, I don't even know, when did we become friends? Like, at what point did it shift from the professional?
I would say, and that was such a coincidence. You were career as an entrepreneur, and I was seeking for some guidance on what to do next. I think I remember I was living sort of yeah, I was a bit confused with my career. I wanted to get some clarification, and I just remember you being that open person that would definitely be willing to have a conversation with me. And it's just so interesting because even when I was thinking back about the first episodes, I think about the desk where I was seated in São Paulo. Now that I'm saying that, I can think about my desk in Rio because that's where I was when exactly, we started this maybe a friendship, or to shift from a professional relationship to a
Yeah.
friendship.
It was like a
And
mentorship, I think, initially.
exactly. And you again, yeah, you said yes. And I think it was just a great opportunity because we both could, yeah, connect and contribute with each other in a very nice way. So I would maybe give some feedback or test some of your ideas out. You would be always willing to listen to me, and again to provide me with guidance and mentorship on some matters. And I think it was just yeah, a great match. That's
Yeah,
how I remember it. Yeah.
that's it. Yeah, it just started with mentoring and ideas and then sharing. And I'm like, what's that? And you've been super generous of your time and your talents with me. And all of a sudden you're like, hey, Felipe, he's an organized guy. He knows what he's talking about. Okay, let's see. And then as we started to get more personal in our conversations, I think just again that non-judgmental, just very trusting, very unconditional. I think that's what
Mm.
it was. It's really unconditional. And I got to meet your mom and your dad on video. So
And
yeah.
and and everyone knows who Valerie is. I talk about, like, if there's one person that I talk about is Valerie. So yeah, well, tonight I'm connecting with my friend from Dallas. Her name is Valerie Hope, and she has a podcast. You should listen. So even last week I was promoting the podcast.
I
It's
appreciate that. I
it's
so
also like
appreciate it.
that. Yeah.
What else is on your list?
Mm.
We have a few more minutes
Oh
here.
well, as yeah, as you say, I keep just thinking about, again, new questions. So, well, now we're in episode 78, but
Yeah.
throughout these 77 episodes before, if listeners could, well, if you could point out some of the things that listeners uh, found in the first episodes, and that they will still find in some of the last episodes, and some very different things that they would notice from the first ones to the last ones, what would those be?
What's the same and what's different about the episodes? Is that what you're
Yeah,
asking?
yeah.
What's the same? What is the same? I think what's the same is that I made an intentional decision not to introduce people with a bio, right? There was no like, this is Felipe. He works at, this company and he's living in this place. And, there wasn't a bio. Um, I made an intentional choice, and I still do from episode 1 up to now, to introduce people the way I would introduce you at a party with a friend.
Mm.
I don't read bios from people at a party, or, I'm not going to coffee shop and going, Felipe, he was born in 19, whatever. He's been working for the last 14 years. No, it's simply, hey, this is Felipe. This is how I know him. This is why he's my friend. I thought you'd be interested in meeting him. So that's been something that's been consistent throughout every single episode. That, and I also have an outro, and the outro was recorded by my niece Carly, who at the time we recorded it was, I think, 13 years old. Whew, yeah, 13, 14 or something. And I remember she came here to my place and we wrote out a script, and I was telling her about it. And this is, she came up with it, and she has a beautiful presence, and she's so confident and such a wonderful speaker that I thought this would be a great opportunity for her. And so she is the voice that you all hear in the outro, Carly Hope. So those are the things that I think are the most consistent throughout every single episode, besides the idea of connecting strangers, clearly. But then some things that are different, between the beginning and now. I think at some point, I don't know what point it was, I started to ask questions about the experience of connecting. I don't think I was doing that in the beginning. I was just kind of like, okay, great, that was a great conversation. Thank you. But at some point I said, it'd be great to hear, for the audience to hear so now that you've had this talk, what was it like? What do you think? What are you walking away with? What do you appreciate? That kind of thing. So making, giving the guests an opportunity to reflect on, if they were nervous in the beginning, were they as nervous at the end, or did it meet the expectation they had? And often I hear, I didn't have any expectations. I just came here open, being trusting. Or some people were like, oh my gosh, I could talk some more. Let's connect. Right? There's some of that too. So I can't think of any other real intentional change with that besides that one right now. Did you notice something? What have you noticed in the evolution?
Yeah, well, I did notice that, well, you were engaging the guests more and more with the connection challenges, right?
Mm,
So I think some of the last ones, or the latest ones actually, have also been very, very much influenced by the guests, either
mm,
created by them or co-created by
yeah.
them, or somehow usually
Inspired. Yeah.
inspired by those specific
Yeah.
conversations.
Well, that is a good point. I actually did make a conscious choice that you're right. Creating connection challenges out of thin air is hard. It's hard. And so then it became, actually, this could be a great way to tee up the next episode, right? So if people do this connection challenge, it'll prepare them to listen to this next episode. And so it became that kind of, it's kind of like a preemptor, right?
Mhm.
So, hey, in the upcoming episode, you'll meet so and so and so and so, and this is what we talked about, and here's a challenge that came up out of that conversation, and then they can tune into the conversation. So that was another conscious decision.
Yeah. And well, the name of the episode, the name of the podcast is Not Quite Strangers, and we've got to learn more about Valerie throughout all of these episodes. Is there still something that the audience doesn't know about you and that you could share to make yourself less of a stranger?
There's a lot that you don't know about
Oh, wow.
me. um, I think what is something that I would share as it relates to this podcast. I think something that I still struggled with was how to engage in the conversation without directing the conversation. And I played with that, right? I told you that first episode was like, okay, I'll just introduce them and see what happens and maybe talk. But it was hard to insert myself. And then I struggled throughout even these 78 episodes of like, well, how do I stay engaged in the conversation without like cutting off the connection that was building, but also move the conversation forward? It's like a whole art form. So
It is.
there have been few episodes where I felt like the third guest, and it was just like a nice, wonderful, equitable conversation. And there have been some where I feel like I was more like, okay, now we're talking about this, and now let's move the conversation in that direction, and now we're going to have dinner, and now we're going to have drinks, and now we're going to, right? And that's something that I've found myself second guessing often, is like I wanted to let go of the reins and just see what happens, but then I was like, this has to be done in less than in an hour. And we want to hit all these other topics, so that's why I invited them here, and we're not talking about that yet. And so I had so I think just to share that so much of my inner chatter about how much to direct and control and how much to be hands off has been a game that I've played all my life, right, in so many different ways. And so sometimes it works really well and sometimes it doesn't. But I did have an insight just this weekend actually about that, about control. That control now, I think as I've evolved as a human being, it's all about courage and efficacy, being effective, being courageous and effective. And what that means is it takes something to lead, right? It does require some level of courage to lead, to say, hey, I got you. Let me show you. I'm with you the whole way. Let me walk alongside you, or let me escort you, or whatever that context is. And and you all, and in my case, I wanted these to be successful. I wanted them to be organized and structured, and I want my guests to feel a certain level of certainty and security that we weren't going to leave them hanging or not laugh at their joke or not, if somebody was monopolizing the conversation, that the other person wouldn't feel left out, or if somebody didn't feel like, hey, I'm talking about something really personal, that other people wouldn't share as deeply or as personally, right? So I think there was Priya Parker talks about this in her book, The Art of Gathering, generous authority. Generous authority. As a host, our job is to put generous authority. So be open, but also, be authoritarian in that, hey, this is a time frame. I want to make sure that both get equal time, that we move the conversation forward for my responsibilities also to the listener. And so, I mean, all this to just say that I thought a lot about what the heck I was doing here. Every time. I love the conversations, but I was always in the back of my mind, okay, has this person talked long enough? Okay, now we need to ask another question. Okay, this conversation is kind of going around in circles. I need to move it forward. So there's always this inner chatter in my head about where to go.
That's interesting, because it seems very, very effortless. So it's interesting to hear that even such an experienced person like you, again, still puts a lot of effort again in making sure it happens the best way possible.
Yeah. And sometimes it was super easy and it was effortless for me too. And other times I'm like, all right, I gotta stop, take a step ahead and think, okay, how would this person react how do I cut them off? Or like, how do I move into, okay, this person can barely hear them. Like, they need to speak up. Like, do I need to send a message in the chat? Excellent.
Well, as we move towards the end of our conversation, because I think we are reaching the limit, I would like really to know, what kind of legacy do you think this podcast leaves?
What legacy this podcast leaves? There's a book that I remember reading years ago. I think this guy was on the Oprah show at one point. His name is Poe Bronson. And I'm not even sure if the book that he talked about on the Oprah show was the same book that I read, but it's called Why Do I Love These People? That was the name of the book. And essentially is a collection of stories of people that he's met throughout time and shared these moments with. So like every chapter is a different person or family or group that he introduces to the reader. And as far as I remember, and again, it's been years since I've read it, there was no connection between the people in the book. It wasn't like I talked to my uncle and then my grandma and then my niece. It was just really kind of random people. And but I really enjoyed that book so thoroughly. It gave me like this peek behind a curtain in someone else's life, the experience of someone meeting, connecting, being influenced, impacted by a relationship or an encounter. And that's the legacy I want. I like for every conversation that I've had on this podcast to have been like a peek behind the curtain for someone that was listening or watching to go, oh my gosh, I never knew that there are people in the world that think like that, or that dress that way, or that listen to that kind of music, or read those types of books, or talk about this in this way, right? And because there's so many of us out there, there's like, 7 billion, 8 billion people on this planet. And I'm just fascinated by people in general, which is why living with host families while I was in Up With People was so meaningful to me. So this is kind of like a way for people to live with somebody else for an hour, right? Just live with, observe, and connect with yourself, because there's something that's resonating, or connect with other people and their perspectives, and be validated by what they're sharing, or be challenged, by it, or expanded by it, like all those things. So that's the legacy. I think that's the opportunity to get a sneak peek behind and connect in ways that with people that you may never have taken the time to meet. And maybe that inspires people to go out and connect with others, or gives them the courage and the direction or the hope. So that's the legacy.
Hope kind of suits you. Yeah.
I know, hope suits me. Yes, it was inherited.
And my last question, because I'm sure as I was curious and we kind of touched based on that, I'm sure others are also curious. What's next? Do you have any plans on, how to move forward?
Yeah. No.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for listening. Well, it was great having you on.
No, yes and no. So part of it is I sense that this was coming to an end, primarily because I
Can you
noticed
walk
that.
us through this
Sorry?
process? Can you please walk us through this process? I think it would be interesting for people to know.
Sure. I think started to notice it when, one, I schedule time with people, right? We usually schedule an hour and a half for the interview. The first 30 minutes or so is usually generally, hey, make sure the audio and video, everything's working, that people have a sense of what this is about. If they've forgotten, they have a sense of certainty about what's going to happen. So there's a little prep. And then we have an hour-long conversation, right? So that takes time to plan, to coordinate schedules, as my life has expanded in so many different ways, and the guests that I have, their lives are also expanding. It's been challenging to also find the right time. So it started happening when scheduling became more challenging for me. So I was running out of time, and sometimes people had to reschedule and finding new times. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a lot more work now. It felt like a heavier lift. So I think that was the initial like, okay, all right. And then I have wonderful conversations with coaches that are in my circle of friends, and I've started having some conversation about, hey, I think the purpose has been served. I do feel like I was drawn to and guided by, right? Like I mentioned, spirit to do this in this way for this time. And when I don't feel that sense of coming alive anymore, that what I call divine discontent is the phrase that I use. It's this divine discontent. It tells me something. That's information that, okay, there's something else. So I'm closing this particular chapter in the episode, in the coming up with new episodes, but I do want the episodes that are here to still have a voice and still have the impact and the legacy. So you'll continue to see, maybe there are going to be short features of some of the conversations you might hear or see written information, whether that's through a book or a blog, or who knows. I have no idea, but I think there's still so much to be mined and leveraged and shared from the episodes. But so that's basically it. And once I decided that, okay, that's it, I'm done, there's a sense of peace. And I think that's when I know that also is this divine discontent, when I know is like, there's some restlessness, right? But it's divine because it's not like some ego trip that I'm done, I don't have time for this. It was not that. But then this idea of, okay, making the decision, and once the decision has been made, a sense of peace, right? There's no guilt, there's no like, oh, shame, there's no right obligation, duty, there's none of those things. It was more of a, okay. And it was a no-brainer to say, I do want to have an honorable closure for this experience. And who better to join me on an honorable closure than the man that was there from the very beginning to help me, launch it and get it off the ground and validate all my crazy ideas and all these, been my partner in crime and setting things up and creating all sorts of wonderful opportunities. And you've given me so much advice and guidance and everything. And even talking to you about this, like, hey, I think I'm going to end this. What do you think? And, and your wisdom around that. So thank you so much, Felipe. Thank you. Obrigada, dankeschön, like, gracias. I can't say it in so many different words, just for not only your deep friendship with me, which, you guys will not be privy to those conversations. Those are private. Those are private, but your generosity of your time and your talents and your skills and your willingness to always give of yourself and serve, right? You've been on all my podcasts. You have been on the 2 podcasts I've done, and you have been such an instrumental role in how I've developed as a human being too. So I'm so grateful for you and what you bring, and excited that people get a chance to see you.
No, likewise. I feel really honored. Thank you so much for providing me with this opportunity, yeah, to be part of this moment and to witness you on planet Earth. It's a beautiful thing to experience, Valerie Hope, and to witness you as a human being. I'm glad technology allows us not only to stay in touch, but also to spread out all of the messages and all of your pieces of wisdom with everyone around the world. This is just so great. And yeah, I could be here for hours talking about again how amazing this is. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, danke schön, obrigado, muchas gracias, merci beaucoup, and everything in between.
Ah, excellent. Well done, friend. For those of you tuning in, thank you all so much for following me in this wonderful journey over the last 78 episodes, as we mentioned. I would have loved for it to be like an 80 episode or 100 episodes. So I'm not gonna lie that there's still some divine discontent there, but when it's time, right? So it's not about the number. But I'm just so grateful for all of you who have been following along and participating or sharing this with others or taking part in the challenges. And I have no idea. I don't think I will ever know the extents to which you went to support this, or those that were guests and following them or engaging with them or maintaining those relationships. And a huge, huge, very special blessing and thank you to every guest that has been has graced the screen and shared part of their soul. That's really what it was. They shared a part of their soul with all of us, and I'm a better person for it, and the world is we're a better place because of you all and what you've shared over the time. And thank you so much. Blessings to everybody, and stay tuned. Who knows where else this is gonna go. But thank you all so much for listening. Be sure to catch up on all the episodes you missed. There's some good stuff out there. There are no favorites. They're all my favorite. but go back and check in to see maybe episodes that would be relevant for you. Continue to share it with friends, families. Rate us on your favorite podcast platforms. Favorite us. Subscribe. Do all the things. This will continue to grow, and it will grow more and more because of you and how you're connecting to this legacy. So I'm so grateful for all of you. Thank you for tuning in, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
You've been listening to the podcast Not Quite Strangers. Be sure to subscribe or follow on your favorite video or podcast platform. And for more information and content, go to notquitestrangers.com. See you next time.